This is Standard Office Procedures, the podcast that helps professionals live and grow through culture, communication, and candor. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Standard Office Procedures podcast. I'm your host, Grace. Hey, it's me, Grace. And with me, as always, my love, my light, it's Shannon. Say hi, Shannon.
Hello.
Hello.
My
and
love,
today,
my light.
That's how I introduce you to everybody all the time. Forget your professional accolades, of which there are many. You are my love and my light. So today we're talking about a topic that I'm kind of excited to talk about, actually. I don't know why I said that like I'm not usually excited. This one I'm actually interested in.
Not like those other garbage podcast
trash episodes
topics
that we've done. But this one is talking about realistic optimism and toxic positivity, right? So I think this toxic positivity sort of, I don't want to say buzzword, but it's becoming a little bit more of a term in like mental health spaces, is referring to this good vibes only mindset that's gotten very prevalent over the last few years, where it's like, you know, we see all like the neon lights or like the girls at the peace side. They're like good vibes only good vibes. And basically toxic positivity is this belief that like to be like you should be this perpetually happy, positive person.
Yeah. And that if you're not, you're being depressing and you're pulling everybody down.
Yeah. So
I also think social media has had a
huge
impact on this, because it's like everything is so great all the time. Everything is so perfect and wonderful. And then people are bringing that offline into their real lives. And it's too much, because it's literally
impossible. No, it's impossible. And we kind of touched on this a little bit in, I think, a last episode we recorded where we talked about toxic positivity in brief. But I love this. So we base all of our episodes off of blog posts. You can read the blog post about this one in the link in the description. But we open by saying too much of a good thing in this case can be a bad thing, which I love. But it's true. I do feel like there's this idea, like you said, where it's like you have to be happy all the time or else you're a bummer or else there's something wrong with you, right? If you're just not like, if your baseline isn't happy. And I think it's important to remember that as human beings, our baseline is like content.
Yeah.
Right? Or that's great. That's what it should be. You know, that's kind of the ideal. It's like my baseline is content. I'm not deliriously happy all the time. I'm not even like really happy all the time or just regular happy. I'm just content.
I was actually listening to another podcast the other day, and they were talking about body types, and they were saying how the BMI came about. But what they were talking about was how the ideal body type became the average body type according to the BMI. And it's like, that is not the same thing as average and content and normal. It's like ideal is the new normal.
That is a great point. That is a great point where it's like, no, that's the ideal. And so if you make the ideal the new normal, then the ideal is something that is quite literally impossible.
And based on what?
Yeah.
Based on what parameters?
Based on fantasy
that are based on made
and Photoshop.
Yeah,
it's based
on made up parameters.
So we're going to remember that as we talk about toxic positivity and realistic optimism in this podcast. We're really going to kind of define toxic positivity, and then we're going to talk about how to embrace realistic optimism. So I think it's important to remember that toxic positivity basically encourages you to bury your negative emotions in favor of this like bright, bubbly, cheerful facade, right? Which is exactly what it is. It's a facade. It's saying that even if you're having a bad day, just put on a smile, you know? And to a degree, that's fine. Like if you're, you know, it's like, okay, you know, I spilled my coffee on my skirt or whatever, and it's not the end of the day. I'm going to make the most of this. That's all right. If you've like suffered a loss or something, like you're grieving or you're going through a very difficult relationship or things are just really hard at work or you're just not having a good day, like it doesn't have to be something extreme. You don't have to smile.
Yeah.
You don't have to be happy. And in fact, like that can make it much worse because all you're doing is repressing all of that negative emotion. And guess what? It's got to come out somewhere.
I feel like toxic positivity is also something that a lot of women do to make other people more comfortable and make other people feel like everything is okay, and also to make themselves look a certain way where it's like, I'm always happy and my feathers are never ruffled. Everything is so great all the time. And it is, like you said, it's an impossible idea. It's the magazine cover.
It's the movie character heroine, right?
Of life, and that's not real.
No. And I do think, I'm glad that you said that, because I do think that women in general, like we're told that our purpose is to be pleasing, visually, you know, attitude, whatever. And, you know, you've heard all that stuff where like a woman can be called, you're called bitchy if you're confident or if you're aggressive, whereas a man is just called a man, right? And it kind of feeds into that. So like, what's the flip side of that is like being really sweet and happy, and it's unfair. So there is a little bit more pressure, I think, on women to be toxically positive. That's not I don't think it's an adverb that exists.
I liked it a lot.
But also remember that when you're talking to other people, you could unknowingly be pushing this attitude of toxic positivity, right? If somebody's telling you that they're having a bad day, and your response is, or like they're going through a tough time, and your response is basically like, just turn that frown upside down. What you're insinuating is that like, they're just not working hard enough to be happy. Like it's the same as when someone's like suffering from your depression and you're like, have you tried not being depressed? Like, why don't you just go
smile.
outside? Yeah, go
Do
for
some
a walk.
yoga.
Yeah. And it's like, that's fine. And those things can certainly help, but also you're ignoring the bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of us fall into traps of saying, like, there's a couple of like toxic positivity phrases that are very common that I heard a lot. And I don't want to get too deep here, but like when my dad died, I was told this a lot, was like, just look on the bright side. Everything happens for a reason.
The bright side of what?
Exactly. Stay positive, or like, oh, just be happiness is a choice. Remember that. Like, I was in this sadness pit and I was being told, like, just don't worry about it. And this is kind of different, but like, it could have been worse, like I was told like, oh, at least he got X many years in, or at least, and I was like, that's so not helping, right? Like, at least it's not even worse, I guess. And we say this to people a lot. We're like, we play, and I call it the misery Olympics. I think my mom actually taught me that term, where it's like, we always use that kind of tongue in cheek, like, well, there are people that are starving, so if you're having a bad day, remember that at least you have your basic necessities met, and okay, fine, but you're still entitled to your emotions.
I think this is very dangerous because when we do that to other people, it causes them to do it to themselves, right? So when you put on this, like, everything could be fine, it could be so much worse, and you're like, you know what? You're right. It could be worse. And so that leads us into things like conversations like I have in therapy, which is I say, but what do I have to complain about? It wasn't that bad. It's not that bad. It's okay.
You're doing comparison.
And that keeps you from actually processing things and dealing with them, So we're not saying walk around and like, bare your deepest emotions all the time. But when you have this, you don't allow room for anybody to feel sad or to have an off day or yourself or to show that ever. Like
you're perpetuating this.
You're perpetuating it, and you're preventing people from actually dealing with their life.
Which is really important. Again, talking about the human experience, like that is a key part of the human experience, is feeling the entire spectrum of emotions.
It's authentic.
You cannot just decide I'm only going to live in the happiness sphere. You just can't do that. I mean, that's just, life will not allow it. I will say my favorite example of like a situation where toxic positivity was actually hilarious is that episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians where Kim loses her diamond earring in the ocean. Have you seen it? Stop.
Girl, I have never watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Listen, I have seen this clip a million times because it's a meme now. I know you've heard this quote where like there's an episode where I'm pretty sure she like loses her diamond earring and Kim is crying in the ocean. They're like, of course they're in like the Maldives. Like, it's beautiful. And then Courtney, I think it's Courtney, I don't know, the one with a lot of kids, comes out and she's holding a baby on her hip. And she's like, what's going on? In her voice. And Kim's like, I lost my diamond earring. And she goes, Kim, there's people that are dying. I gotta say, I did like that one. Like, Kim is allowed to be sad about losing her diamond earring. I mean, I'm kind of rolling my eyes, but like, she's allowed, right? But Courtney shutting her down and being like, there's people that are dying was amazing. So let's talk about like the very real negative impacts that toxic positivity can have beyond just morale and your own kind of sense of self-worth and, existence. Is that at work, it can cause team members to suppress concerns, emotions, and needs, right? So from a professional lens, if you are a workplace where maybe there's kind of a trend of toxic positivity, which is like, just look on the bright side, just like make the most of it, just smile. What you're telling your employees or your team is that like, there's no space for frustration or sadness or anxiety here, which are all natural parts of a job.
We've talked a lot about how important it is to be authentic in the workplace, both, as an employee and as a manager, because when you do that, you build a lot more trust with people. And so if you're doing this, like we said, this toxic positivity, it's just everything is so great all the time. Just smile. We're going to get through it. Everything's cool. Come on, guys. And you're just a cheerleader. Ooh, you're not allowing room for people to grow and build trust with each other because they're fake. They're being fake. And sometimes it's easier to just brush those things under the rug because it makes you feel better in the moment, but long term you're just hurting yourself.
And also when you ignore these bad business outcomes or negative events or things that have people kind of down in the dumps, basically it's not going to go away, right? It's not just going to make all these feelings go away. When you tell somebody to smile, it doesn't magically cure their sadness. They're just told, cover up your sadness. It's making me uncomfortable. So it's still there. So instead, at a workplace, when you say, don't do that, I don't like it, I want you to fake happiness instead, it basically causes the situation to become a ton worse until something or somebody cracks under the pressure, right?
Yeah.
These things all have shelf lives.
Absolutely.
We can pretend for so long and then it either sours or it explodes.
You have used the analogy before. If you go to this beautiful garden and you kick over a rock and there's termites underneath it, whether you kick over that rock or not, the termites are still there, or the bugs or the fungus or whatever it is.
Either you see it and you address it, or you stand there and you stare at your beautiful garden going,
And then one day your garden dies and you're like, what happened?
How did this happen? Whereas if you just kicked over the rock and like treated for the termites, you'd have many, many years left of garden. I love a garden. I don't have one. I would be very bad at it.
I would love a garden. I'm just not a gardener.
No, I don't have time for that.
I like to watch movies about gardens.
Me too. Oh my God. I do too. I love an English garden where it's like crazy and rambling, you know?
Like, did you watch that movie, The Beautiful Fantastic?
No, but you told me I have
to.
And it's about a garden?
It's a garden.
All right. I'm sold. I need to watch that. Okay, so let's talk about realistic optimism. So realistic optimism is basically the opposite of toxic positivity, right? Realistic optimism is, I
think that's important because we're saying the opposite of toxic positivity is not total negativity.
It's not. It is realistic optimism, right? So it's this level of allowance for yourself to have your feelings and also to be optimism. But I love this. It's so succinct. Realistic optimism is optimism with a plan, right? Toxic positivity, beyond what we described, it also skews into this area of like, if I just believe, like if I just put it out there in the universe, look, say what you will about manifesting. I'm not going to judge or I'm not going to say anything about it. But like, it's kind of this belief that like, I'm just going to think good thoughts and good things will come my way. That's great, girl. Like, do your thing. If you feel like that's going to work for you, okay. But what really is going to be effective is coupling that belief, that feeling of like, this is going to work out with hard work and perseverance. Yes. So there's a difference there. It's kind of nuanced, but it's there, where realistic optimism is the understanding that like, I can be positive, but I also have to work hard and create my own opportunities.
Yeah.
I can't just go good vibes only and wait for the universe to like pour sunshine into my lap.
Yeah. It's like, it's strategic optimism, you know? I mean, there's like, toxic positivity is so fake when you think it's just positivity.
Yeah. It's like empty.
It's just positivity. It's just painting something with a pretty brush. But optimism, I feel like, is like having an outlook that is on the more positive side. But like you said, like it's strategic. It's realistic. It's like, let's plan for when things don't go wrong. When things don't go right.
When things don't go wrong is toxic positive. I'm just kidding. That's a different thing.
Because they're not going to go wrong.
They never
good vibes
will.
only.
Good vibes only.
Good days only.
Stop. The realistic optimism definition is also believing in your own ability to succeed. So it's like that confidence piece where it's like when, again, this was kind of mind blowing for me a while ago when we defined confidence. And I realized that confidence isn't just like being awesome at everything. It's knowing that you have the tools and the know-how to do a good job in any given situation or in any specific given situation. And I feel like realistic optimism is similar, where it's like, you are optimistic that because of your own skill set and your resources, that no matter how challenging it gets, you'll be able to overcome it, right? Absolutely. So it's this awareness that it will be challenging. There will be bad days. It's not good days only. It's not good vibes only. But even with the bad days, the bad vibes, you're still going to overcome it and be successful.
I think you're right about believing and knowing the tools that you have and playing to your strengths and playing to what are the things you can win and achieve at. I'm having a hard time today. I came this morning and I was like, I'm so overwhelmed personally and professionally and just like, oh my gosh. And I was talking to Megan, who's kind of like my office mom/sister.
She's lovely.
And she was like, listen, you need to pick something small and what's your lowest hanging fruit and go for that. And you need to understand that like, I know that you have all the tools in your toolbox to get through this and to get over the things that you need to get over. And I was like, you're right. Like I forgot, like I do have the tools.
Sometimes you have to constantly be reminded by yourself, ideally, or sometimes others, that you have the tools. You forget, right? Yeah. It's not like it's just you wake up every day being like, I'm great at my job. Like it's like a muscle. We compare things to muscles all the time. But basically it's like if you don't use it or if you don't pick it up often, you'll either forget it's there or you will fear it's atrophied. And the reality of the situation is oftentimes like we're just as sharp as we always were. Yeah. We just have to pick it up and like whet it a little bit, try. Whet with an H.
Whet it.
W-H-E-T.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sharpen it a little. So let's talk about how to transition to realistic optimism. So if you find that maybe you are suffering from suffering is a little bit harsh. Maybe if you are espousing a toxically positive mindset, there's some pretty straightforward ways that you can shift into more realistic optimism. So let's talk about SMART goals. Shannon, I think this is kind of like you're the SMART goal queen. So we've talked about SMART goals before on the podcast. Will you define what SMART is as an acronym?
Yes. So it's specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and timely. So if you have a goal, it means it's specific. Like you have been very clear about what it is you're trying to achieve. It's measurable. So it's not just like, I'm going to get better at X. It's I'm going to do these things by these dates, right? It's achievable. It's realistic, maybe it's a challenge, but it's not just like, I'm going to make $1 million this year.
Yes.
I will not be making $1 million this year.
Or I'm going to write a book.
Right. It's reasonable. So like, I don't know. How would you explain the reasonable part?
I feel like that's exactly right. It's kind of achievable and reasonable are kind of the same thing. Like it has to be a thing that you can actually do. Like you said, like for me, okay, so writing a book is a good one for this actually.
This one has relevant actually.
Okay, let's go with relevant.
But I think that's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I think reasonable, however you define smart, whether it's reasonable or relevant, there's similar definitions where is this a thing that you can realistically do with your other commitments, with your time, with your, with all the things that you're going on in your life. Like achievable is one thing, right? Like, yeah, okay, I can write a book. But is it reasonable that I'm trying to do it before the 26th of January or whatever? It's like that needs to make sure.
And I think when, relevant being an alternate, word for this, relevant is like, does this even make sense? Like, do I want to go become a yoga teacher when that is not going to help me achieve my goal of being a better marketer? Like, you know what I mean?
Are you
like
talking about me?
No, I'm just trying to think of something that I would never do. Like, maybe that sounds cool, but that is not really going to help me get to my bigger goals, you know? And then timely, meaning, you've set a timeline for it and you're going to get it done within a set amount of time that's like realistically
that
soon.
Makes sense. Yeah. You don't want to do it and like one day I will do this, right? Yeah. If you have the smar of your smart done, it probably won't get done, right? Like you have to set a deadline that's reasonable. Right. Back to the R. So yes, transition to SMART goals is a way to transition from this this ideology of like everything's going to be fine. It's all just going to come to me. I'll write the book. I'll do the thing. It's going to be fine. Where that's a lot of talk and not a lot of action and a lot of like blind belief that it's just going to happen. Now you've set SMART goals and now you're like, okay, I've got a plan, right? Yeah. We talked about how realistic optimism is optimism with a plan. SMART goals is your plan.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've talked about toxic positivity from the frame of like annoying people that we know, or people in social media and people we know in the office that are just always bubbly and always going. But maybe you've been practicing some of this with yourself without realizing it. I know that I've fallen in this trap before. Like I tried to be a very optimistic, upbeat, positive person. And there are times where I'm like, hey, it's got to get better. It's got to get better. We have to do this, and like, but I'm not maybe actually doing anything about it. And so that could be a way that you're falling into this toxic positivity without realizing it or without doing it on purpose, or hiding your issues on purpose. It can be scary to make a plan.
I think you should do a little check-in with yourself. And we'll kind of talk about this in a moment when we talk about kind of knowing yourself and knowing your general disposition. But it is important to be aware of what you're starting off with, right? Like what's your baseline? Are you somebody who is always kind of like forced optimism? And if that's the case, you don't have to do that. We'll get back to that.
It can be easy to rely on that too. Like if you're feeling overwhelmed, it can be a crutch to fall back on. And I think that's what we do in the workplace a lot of times. We fall back on that because it's a lot easier than facing the music.
The reality. I think you're right. I think let's actually skip. We're gonna circle back to something. I'm sorry I said circle back. I know that's very like business jargony, but we're gonna get back to that in a minute. But let's talk about knowing your own personality, because I do think like, it doesn't matter whether you're naturally pessimistic or optimistic or realistic or somewhere in the middle, which is I think the most normal, right? No one's really always one thing. It's important to balance these personal tendencies. So if you are really negative, maybe adopting some realistic optimism is a good route for you. If you are unflaggingly like teeth grittingly positive, it's important to balance a little bit of realism in there. Not to say that you should skew negative. It's more that like, okay, look, I don't have to be happy all the time. I'm actually learning this myself.
Yeah.
I'm learning that I don't have to be the entertainer in the office. I can have a bad day. And I will say that if you're somebody who's going from like possessing toxic positivity to somebody you're trying to just kind of be normal and have a healthier grip on positivity, it will be a little strange for people people started to be like, are you okay? What's wrong? When I started coming in and not being super bubbly. But now it's normal. Yeah. And when I come in and I'm not over the top happy, I'm just fine. It's not a big deal, you know? Yeah.
And you're talking about knowing your personality. Like maybe you are the person who's always making these plans, always making these goals, always head down working. And you feel like you don't have time to practice any optimism or positivity because you are so deep in the realism of everything. Right. Maybe this can be a helpful, strategy for you to practice this realistic optimism where like, yes, you can still be, very goal-oriented, very work-oriented, but with like a more positive light on it instead of a negative one, which I think is something, there's a few people that I know that I work with or have worked with in the past. They tend to be a little more like, no, that's not going to work because this. And it's all about the results and the SMART goals. Yes. Then there's like no room for that optimism.
There's a balance is key to everything, right? And also if you're not sure where you fall, like if you're like, I don't really know what my personality is. We talk pretty frequently about personality tests and assessments. And we've talked about the DISC, which is more professional. But like if it's just for you and you're trying to figure out like who am I? What is my personality type? We talk about the Enneagram on here a bunch, and I think the Enneagram's a good tool. Myers-Briggs, I think, is getting a little bit defunct, but
yeah,
it's
I
also
don't really recommend Myers-Briggs anymore, just because I feel like it was. I mean, I still think there's use in it, just like there's use in a lot of things. But the way that it was created is very short-sighted. It wasn't a very holistic view of all different types of neurodiversity. And so I think that is a little dangerous.
That's a good point. So I would say, do some Googling, find one that seems right to you.
There's a bunch of them.
There are a bunch of them. I have like the Enneagram because I do feel like it's been helpful for me because I didn't know this about myself. Like I'm somebody who I skew towards toxic positivity or just staying busy. Basically, I don't want to feel any sadness. I don't like it. I don't have time for it. I'll just stay really busy and it can never get me. That did not work. Yeah. I had like a full on it caught me, guys, in January of 2022. So I would recommend that no matter who you are, you need to kind of check in with your emotions, and whether it's through a personality assessment or a therapist or just to talk with a friend or just sitting and writing in your journal, how do I really feel? How am I feeling about where I am in life, where I thought I was going to be, what my goals are, this kind of self-assessment and checking in and this self-awareness is so important for your own kind of mental and emotional well-being. And I think it's something that we used to, like before social media and before the busyness of kind of professional world now, there used to be more time for it and more allowance. And now I just think we just don't do it. We're always so stimulated by external stimulants, whether it's our phone or our friends or, whatever, that there's not really much time for just like sitting and thinking about how you feel.
Yeah.
One of my favorite examples of this is our coworker, Jess, where I'll be like, Jess, how are you feeling? And she'll be like, I don't know. And I love that honesty. I know. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, that's okay. I was going to say, I feel like, knowing yourself and doing these personality assessments and really doing some inward thinking, I feel like is another one of those examples of we feel like that's something people do or they don't do. Like either that's something people do all the time, like me and Grace. I'm like, do you want to talk about yourself and myself and our feelings and how it relates to other people?
Exactly.
Or you just never do it. Yeah. It's like, it's not for me. And I think that for most people, the best value is somewhere in the middle there where maybe you spend some time on it. You don't have to live in it, but it's good to know and spend a little time on it. Maybe dip your toe back in, once a year, once every 6 months, and just kind of, okay, am I still that person? Feeling? Yeah. Okay, I think it's really going to help you in your relationships if you're one of those people that never does it. Now, if you're one of those people that does it all the time,
moderation
is key. Moderation, because also you have to remember, not everybody is doing this type of introspective work all the time, and that's something I have to remind myself of, both at home with my husband and at work. And I'm like, not everybody's always thinking about the relationships all the time. They're just living.
They're just working.
They're just living and working,
I don't mean to go too deep into the psychotherapy hole, but I do feel like it's important to acknowledge, just like we talked about how oftentimes toxic positivity, there you go, is more more shunted on women than men. I do think that men societally kind of get the short end of the stick as far as emotions, because, there's this idea of like to be a man means to be like very stoic and strong and not expressive. And obviously that's flawed. Men and women, they both possess the full range of human emotions. Men are equal, I don't say equally as emotional. I'm not saying that we're all emotional, but I think it's true. Like we have an equal emotional range. And I do think that's an important thing. If you are a man and you're like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, or, I just don't have any emotions. You do. We all do. And it's not, you don't have to listen to these society nonsense things where you're supposed to be one thing all the time. You too are like, feel free to check in with your emotions. That's healthy. That's good. That doesn't mean you're weak or feminine.
You don't have to tell anybody right off.
No, do it secretly. Just have a journal. On your own. And then you could throw away the paper. I don't care. You can burn it. Shoot it up. Yeah. But I think getting more comfortable with that and not feeling like it's a shameful thing, because it's not. It's just human nature again.
Yeah, I think if you are a woman and you want, perhaps there's a gentleman in your life.
Gentleman caller.
My husband is he's a type 9 on the Enneagram. So he's the peacemaker. Everything is always about other people. It is like terrifying for him.
Conflict avoidance.
Like with 7s, where he doesn't want to spend too much time on himself. He's worried about everybody else. And I was like, hey, will you do this fun test? I think I know what you are, but I don't know. And I'm like, it'll take you 5 minutes. And he did it. And he was like, it says I'm this. And I'm like, okay. And every now and then I'll bring it up. Like, do you remember that thing that you did? And I try not to be too like pushy about it, but it has been useful for me to understand where he's coming from.
Yeah. And again, I'm sorry, I promise we'll get off of this in just a second, but I do think it's important that you said something where I liked a lot, where you said, do it every 6 months or a year and say, am I still this person? Yeah. Okay. I think so many of us carry around flawed, and I'm putting this in quotes, truths from our families of origin or our childhood, where like, oh, well, I'm just, I'm somebody who doesn't follow through, or I'm lazy or I'm hysterical. I'm giving my own, right? This is what I always believed about myself. Because
I'm happy. I'm perfect.
I'm cheery.
I'm
like
a
I'm
girl.
the cute
I'm
one.
easy.
Mm-hmm. There you go. And I feel
not
like
easy. You
easy.
know that
No,
way.
you're like chill,
easy
right?
to get along with. Easy to deal with.
You're a people pleaser. Yeah. And I think so many of us, we carry these things as if they are true. Like, oh, this is true about me because people that I love and trusted told me that this was true, or this was my role in my family of origin, or, you know, whatever. And we grow and evolve as human beings. You are not who you were when you were 7 or 12 or 15 even. Like, that was a different person. And those are all important pieces of you. But like, I thought for the longest time that I just don't follow through. Yeah. I just don't. That's not true.
No, it's not true.
And
you follow through more than almost anybody.
You mean it? Thank you.
Do.
But I do feel like I just thought that was who I was. Like, it was as unchangeable as the color of my eyes, you know? And we talk about soft skills in this podcast, but like, check in with yourself and see if maybe these weights that you're carrying around, are they serving you or are they impeding you? And are they even valid? And if maybe you feel like, okay, this is valid, but I don't want it to be, okay, let's work on it. You know, totally. The way I started being somebody who followed through was I ran a 5K. That's not super hard. I mean, it's not easy and it wasn't fun.
Impossible.
I didn't like it.
I will not be doing
but
it.
You don't have to. I'd never make you do that. But I do feel like I was like, oh, I wish I could do that, but I just can't because I don't follow through. And then I was like, you know what? Screw it. Like, I'm going to run a 5K. Yeah. And then I ran 2 in 1 year and I was like, okay, I did not run the 10K I signed up for. I said, no, thank you. But that was because I knew my limits and I knew I wouldn't like it. So anyway.
You know, my therapist told me, I know we talk about my therapist all the time.
I love your therapist.
But she told me one time, you know, she was like, it's okay for you to be grateful for the person who got you to where you are. For the you that got you where you are, that doesn't mean that you still have to be that person.
Yes.
You can thank that person.
100%.
And then be a new person.
Yes. That is okay. And in fact, that is called growth and that is normal. So okay, now we're done. That was your therapy session for the day with 2 non-therapists. The Standard Office Procedures podcast is presented by Blue Summit Supplies. We're an online office supply store that puts you at the forefront of our focus by offering new career-building resources every single week. Sign up for our newsletter and visit our blog at bluesummitsupplies.com for free downloads, tools, and tips to make your job easier and more fun. All right. So another thing I want to talk about is, and we talk about this a lot, is when it comes to toxic positivity and how to turn that into realistic optimism, is to remember your circle of control, right? What can you control? What is within your control? If you're trying to be super positive all the time, maybe it's because you feel like you're out of control and that's really frustrating you and eating at you. And one thing that's very helpful for me is to take a step back and say, okay, you know, I'm frustrated about this thing at work and I want it to be this way. Do I have the power to change it? Nope. So guess what? I'm going to let it go. And it's like, I use this example where it's like, I think I'm very chill and relaxed. And I'll look down and see that I have 2 white knuckle grips on like my job. And I have to go, oh, whoops. And I have to force myself to open my hands. And I will do that periodically because my hands will just white knuckle grip again. You know, when I'm not looking, I'll just get that control tension. And so you have to constantly check in and relax. You have to remind yourself like, this is not within my control. I'm going to let it go. Like, it's a very conscious effort.
I think that's something that can really cause somebody to start having these traits of toxic positivity is if you're in the workplace and you can sense that there is tension and you can sense that things aren't quite right or relationships aren't quite right, it can be very tempting and very easy to just be like, okay, I'm just going to be the happy person because that is what I can do to control the situation. Yep. Nothing will be wrong if I'm happy.
Yes.
And you cannot control what's going on with other people.
And you may do this a lot in your personal life.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you do this a lot. So I think this is very common for people pleasers or people with codependent tendencies is like, everything's going to be fine if I just am happy and make everybody happy. I always think of the episode of New Girl where Jess, you know, her parents are divorced and she's like, they're fighting. And then she's like a little kid. It's a flashback and she's like trying to dance to distract them. She's
That's
like, hey,
exactly
look at me.
What this is.
It's exactly right. So I feel like remembering that is not your responsibility, especially in the workplace. And to release that white knuckle grip. It's going to be okay.
Still be optimistic.
You can be realistically optimistic.
And be realistic about, I can't do anything about that. So me putting on a show is not going to like fix anything. Not going to fix it. Instead, I'm going to go take care of myself and work on my own stuff. And then another way that you can kind of replace toxic positivity with realistic optimism is to practice gratitude. I really like this one because when we consciously focus on what we're grateful for in our lives, we actually increase positive feelings and satisfaction. It helps us keep this sense of optimism about our lives and our circumstances while we're still grounded in reality. So it's this like, yeah, things are actually really great, but it's not this like pie in the sky, everything's amazing all the time. You're kind of selectively, very intentionally going, okay,
what is actually great. And you're able to kind of take inventory of the really like actual real measurable things that are great instead of this like sweeping broad.
No, I think that's really true because it makes you more grateful. You can't be equally grateful for all of the things or pretend that things are great. You know, that's not going to get you anywhere. But if you choose things that are your values and your things in your life that are very good, maybe it's things in your work life, things at work that you are very grateful for.
Yeah.
You know, that can be a very healthy way of kind of like channeling that positivity towards things that deserve it. You know?
I did that just this week when I was and I talked to Shannon about this, I was very frustrated with my job. And it was kind of unusual because usually I think I love my job. But I was very frustrated and I was really losing sight of like what I was grateful for about it. And Shannon and I had just had like a brief conversation. I had a conversation with my classmates and they helped me realize like, you know, there's a lot of really great, I have a lot to be grateful for. That's not me just going, I know it's a good job. I better be thankful.
Yeah. What do I have to be upset about?
Exactly. Which is again, that toxic positivity. Instead, I was like, okay, what literal things am I grateful? I'm grateful for the flexibility. I'm grateful for my coworkers. I'm grateful for all kinds of stuff. And I came out of it much happier and much more like with a different attitude. Another one of my practicing gratitude tools, I love this one, is whenever I'm like feeling super down in the dumps, I usually take a bath and I think about how like 100 years ago, or not even maybe, a bath, like a hot bath with bath oils is like a decadence.
The peak of luxury.
Like what queens would
Somebody
get.
would have had to bring buckets of hot water boiled over the fire for you.
And then have to wait for it to cool. Like the fact that I can just walk into and I'm not like a rich person by any means, and I have access to
running water.
I have running water and I have hot water and I have a bathtub. So anytime I want, I can take a bath.
Funny.
And I know it's so ridiculous, but like it really does help me realize like, all right, Grace, like your life is, you know, and this isn't the same as like, I can't be sad because people are suffering. It's more like, you know, I can be sad, but I can also acknowledge that I'm sitting in a hot bath with a Lush bath bomb, living the life.
It can be so easy to
I
find
can cry
things
in a
like that
bath.
to be grateful for.
Yeah,
and you know what you
really
have control over? Finding 20 minutes in your day to do that.
And it's, guys, it's so rewarding. I know it sounds cheesy, but yeah, just take time. List off 5 things. Yeah. Do it right now. While you're sitting in your car or wherever you're listening to this, just think of 5 things. They can be people, they can be physical objects, they can be sensations, they can be your pets that make you, that you're like, you know what, I'm very grateful and I'm lucky to have this thing. That doesn't mean I can't be sad. And doesn't mean things aren't also hard, but I sure am grateful for this. And it'll help.
I think so, for sure. You know, I feel like this ties in a lot with the circle of control that we were just talking about. Things that are in your circle and the things that are outside your circle.
Yep.
So this is a little dark, but you know, as we're recording this, and I think this comes out pretty soon, there's a lot of
stuff happening in the world.
world. And not to get too deep into that, but you know, I was watching, I had the news on, just the morning news. And my daughter, who's 10, she's almost 11, she was like, she had a lot of questions and a lot of worries and a lot of concerns. And, you know, I was like, you know, it's important to know what's going on in the world.
Right.
But it's also important to be very grateful for where we are and what we have and not to get too wrapped up in that because you cannot do anything about it. You 11-year-old Georgia cannot do anything about that. So what can you do something about? What can you do to bring some positivity and light into the world today? Not toxic positivity, but it's like making a plan, being grateful for the things that you have. And this is the exact conversation we had, was like, focus on the things that you control and that you can be grateful for.
Such a good mom.
No.
Yes, you are. This just in, Shannon's a good mom. Don't let her lie to you. And then our last point, no, you love this. You're an amazing mother. The last point about replacing toxic positivity with realistic optimism is to reframe your problems into opportunities. First of all, I want to say that one of my favorite Shannonisms is when she says, I see a shopportunity. That's only semi-related because it's the same word. But whenever Shannon's like, oh no, something doesn't fit or it got ripped, she's like, oh, it's a shopportunity.
I know. It's like I've gained some weight and it's like, oh, shopportunity.
Which is kind of the best example of this because instead of being like, oh my God, like I have to, you know, spend this money. I have to do this thing. I'm down about my figure or whatever. Instead, it's like, oh, shopportunity.
I love shopping.
This is so fun. So basically, yes, reframing your problems into opportunities where you're like, okay, yes, there's a challenge, but I'm going to shift my thinking and instead I'm going to reframe it. Why am I saying reframe instead of reframe?
Reframe.
Reframing. It yes, maybe. It inspires our curiosity and our ingenuity, and it makes us feel optimistic, but realistically so, right? So it's basically saying like, all right, this is a challenge, right? This was a curveball at work. I was not expecting this. Honestly, I just went through this very recently too. I was having a lot of trouble because I felt like pieces of my job were being taken away from me. And I was feeling very undermined because I was like, well, this is mine. You know, I was feeling this is my job. And I talked with my mentor. I don't even know if I can call her that. Can I call Eileen my mentor?
Totally.
She's one of my mentors.
Absolutely.
You're my main mentor. That's true. Don't laugh. That's a fact. Look at my eyes. You're my mentor and I love you.
I love you.
Okay. Anyway,
hey guys,
but
thanks for being here for this.
Thank you for dropping in on our intimate moment. That's our next podcast, an intimate moment with Shannon and Grace.
Melvin can come to that one.
Melvin could definitely come to that one. All right. So, but I was going to say that I was feeling pretty down. You know, I was like, okay, I've been undermined. This is my job and nobody respects me. And instead she was like, Grace, people are helping you. Like, people are excited about culture. They're excited about what you're doing. They want to help. You should be happy about this. You know, you should be cheerleading and supporting them and saying, yeah, absolutely. Come on in. You know, the more the merrier, instead of being negative and, you know, having this attitude of like, you're taking my stuff. And nothing changed, right? No actual workflow or process or personnel changed in that interaction. All that changed was my mindset. Your
perspective.
And I'm so much happier.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in such a better mood.
Well, yeah. I mean, when people practice this like overwhelming positivity, it can make it very difficult to confront when there's real issues.
Oh my gosh,
because
you're so right.
It's so outside of what they're used to, right? We do what we're used to and what we're comfortable with. And if that's constant positivity, it makes it very hard. Sometimes there are problems that you cannot gloss over.
Yeah.
And you have to confront and deal with. And so if this is something you make more common, that you reframing things as curious and opportunities. Brandon Freeman, that we work with, our director of sales, so wonderful. He is, I would say, a great example of somebody who practices realistic optimism, because he's a very optimistic, very happy guy. But he is not going to run from issues. And he, I think, is where, you know, we at work started saying a lot of like, all right, there's some opportunity here
for growth,
as opposed to, oh man, we got a lot of problems.
Yeah, we're screwed.
Because we do have a lot of problems, but like looking at them in a different way of like, okay, this is an opportunity to learn, to grow, to create something new, to change. You know, that's such a great way of looking at things.
I know it sounds cheesy. Like, I really do. You know, sitting here talking about this stuff, I know that if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, you don't know my life, you know, I get it.
That's true.
That's true. We don't know your life. Write in. I want to know about your life. I love knowing people's business. But you're right. I don't know your situation. I don't know your feelings. I don't know all this stuff. But I've got to say, I cannot recommend enough just giving a couple of these things a try. Just trying them out. Practice some gratitude. Reframe it a little bit. You know, think how could I think about this in a way, and call a friend, you know, call somebody that you trust. If you have a mentor, if you have a boss or a superior or somebody who you just know, like they've got good advice and you trust their judgment, call them and say, look, I'm trying to reframe this in a positive light. I just can't. Can you help me? I bet they can, you know, I bet there's a way. And remember your circle of control. Remember not to burn yourself out being angry about things that you cannot change.
Yeah.
And remember what you can change, right? You control like how you spend your time. You control who you interact with. You control what you say and do. So if you need to make some adjustments there, have at it.
I like what you were saying about call a friend, call a mentor.
Yeah.
I think it's important who we surround ourselves with. So if you are somebody that is surrounded by perpetually positive people, that can make it very difficult to bring things up. You know, so maybe you have a friend and that's who you usually talk to about stuff because they're your constant cheerleader.
Yep.
That's great. We all need those people in our lives. But we also need people who can help us be grounded and solution focused. And so if you don't have anybody like that you can talk to, I recommend trying to find someone.
Yes.
Maybe it's somebody at work, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a family member, and brace for the fact that it's not always going to be positive. It's going to be hard. But I think that's so valuable and such a good thing to practice is, you know, unloading some of this stuff sometimes in a way that is positive, but forward thinking.
You're so smart. Hey, thanks for coming to our podcast. You're welcome for Shannon's brain. We'll see you guys in a week.
Bye.
This has been a Blue Summit Supplies production. Good job, Larry.